and welcome everybody to my first video where I'm going to be ranking every single Kendrick Lamar album, one of the best artists of this generation and certainly one of my favorites. But without further ado, let's get it started. We're in 7th place, and his worst album I think is Untitled Unmastered, which is his To Pimp a Butterfly throwaway album. I think it's solid. It's mid or solid. It's pretty good for just some throwaway tracks. It's still crazy to say this is not a bad album, far from bad, and it's still his worst work to date. And I just think the other 6 are just better in my opinion. And there's some highs on Untitled Unmastered, but the other albums just have higher highs. Untitled Unmastered has lower lows, and it's just not as good as the other 6. Now in 6th place, I have his debut mixtape, Overly Dedicated, Where It All Started. I think this one's very, very, very underrated. And it's definitely very underappreciated. It has some very good tracks. I think this one's very slept on. It's pretty good for just a debut mixtape. And I think the 5 higher than it are just so much better, though. Especially because Kendrick's never put out anything bad, in my opinion. But this one's solid. I think I'd say it's a good mixtape, and it's just not better than the other 5. Now, 6th place was Kendrick's debut mixtape. In the 5th spot, I have his debut album with Section 80. I think this one actually has a ton of bangers. I think this one's really good. It's definitely held back by some of the lower tracks on this album, like No Makeup and Chapter 6. I think it has some of the better Kendrick Lamar songs, like Rigor Mortis, Keisha's Song, Ronald Reagan Era, ADHD. It has some of his best bangers to date. I just think it's just too inconsistent to be any higher on this list, especially considering some of the albums Kendrick has put out. Now in 4th place, I have his newest album and the Grammy-winning rap album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I think this one's really hated on. Like, it's definitely really underrated. I think this is one of the better albums of the 2020s decade. I think it's probably top 3. It's probably top 3 from its year, top 5, or top 3 from the decade. I think this one, it's one of my favorite Kendrick albums. It has a lot of great songs on it. I really think this might honestly be one of the most consistent Kendrick albums. It's just the peaks aren't higher than the peaks of his top 3, which we're going to get into in a second. Now in 3rd place, we have Damn. I don't think it's quite perfect, but it's definitely a classic. It has many amazing songs. There's a reason this at one point was my favorite Kendrick Lamar album. I think the other 2 on this list are definitely much better, but I think Damn is a very good album. I think it's a very good album, certainly. I think it's the best from 2017. I think it's probably one of the best from the 2010s decade. It's probably up there, maybe in the top 5. I just think it's not better than the other 2 on this list that he put out. Taking the silver medal for the second best Kendrick album. I know this is going to get a lot of people mad, but I have To Pimp a Butterfly here. I really think with the album in 1st place, which I think you all know what it's going to be, but you really can't go wrong with saying either one is the best or the second best. It's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation. I think the one in 1st place is much better, but I still think this is a very great album. I think it's a 10 out of 10 album. I think it's got probably my favorite Kendrick Lamar song, some of my favorite of his songs. And it's just, this one's definitely good. It's just I like the 1st place one definitely way more. Wasn't To Pimp a Butterfly in 1st place. It had to be this album. It is Good Kid, Mad City. I think this is easily his best album. Every song is perfect, I think, especially the standard version. I know there might be some questions around the deluxe version, but I think this is definitely his best album. There's a reason this is regarded as one of the best albums of all time. I agree. I think this is probably a top 5 rap album of all time. It's just so amazing. Like the fact Kendrick, this was his second album, and he really made it this good. And it's like this. I think this is much better than To Pimp a Butterfly. I just enjoy the listen way more. Definitely one of my favorite albums of all time. And to wrap up my first video on this channel, ranking every single Kendrick Lamar album, it would really help if you could comment what I did wrong with this list and comment what I did right with this list. Your support really helps. And without further ado, that'll do it. Peace.